Um, Good. Hello. So yeah, of course, there is a concern among the Kievites, among the residents of Ukraine. The city might be targeted again. So, for instance, the air raid warning this morning was lasting for another 5 hours. The attacks were not in Kiev, but in the western part of Ukraine. But I think what is also very important when we discuss these attacks yesterday, what really changed? We've been in the war with Russia for the last half a year, a bit more, but we're moving to a different stage of the war. I think it would be very disturbing, like, and not really correct for us to hear that, the attack is revenge on something. The occupation and invasion of Ukraine is unprovoked. We think that the what is going on is the new stage of the Russian war after they having the military defeat. For the last 2 months, when the Ukrainian army is liberating the towns, they have a new commander, which was known in Sergei Surovikin, which is in charge of operation in Ukraine. He was doing the very same things in Syria, for instance, when he was a commander in Syria. So the tactic is, instead of just, fighting the military, is attacking the critical infrastructure all over the country. And I should remind, it's probably not that horrific. It doesn't look that emotionally, challenging as attacks on the, human sides, the critical infrastructure. But we should understand this is again, the war crime, the attacks on the power grids and cutting out the whole cities from the electricity. Has no military purpose apart from, terrorize the country, make people to, create this anxiety among the people and make the Ukrainian cities somehow unlivable for some time.
Yeah. You talk about how the imprecision of the bombing is also a problem because it seems so random. You're right, they're targeting infrastructure, but there are civilians also targeted. Even, what we saw was just a childcare play centre yesterday, a playground attacked. It seems, as you point out, really wanting to drive home this fear.
Sure, because it's something we experienced for the last months. Of course, there were a lot of attacks on infrastructure objects, but there are so many. We're speaking about the thousands within half a year on the residential buildings. And it's true that the Russian weapon is extremely imprecise. If you really follow the Russian media, yesterday, according to the Russian media, they attacked the security service of Ukraine, which didn't happen. Instead, we have the playground, the Central Park, the university, which is also ironically the Russian language faculty, the Russian culture museum. So it's totally out of the place. There is no military purpose of that, but we have 19 people dead. Among them, for instance, just in Kiev, there would be a doctor who works for the child hospital who was driving to work. So indeed, this is a case. But the problem is that this cannot be met as an invitation to the negotiations, because still, even in the talks of Vladimir Putin, which sometimes we cannot verify, sometimes he openly lies, now he says that they are punishing Ukrainians, so it's not even the invitation to negotiate something. And as we understand, after yesterday, the attacks went on, and we have a few other power grids in central Ukraine, being targeted.
Yeah. There's a lot of talk of Russian fatigue, and you talked about the recent defeats by the Ukrainians. Do the Ukrainian military forces and, in fact, the communities feel still empowered? Are they suffering the same level of fatigue? Because this must be very hard day to day to get up and face the same battle.
It's interesting that these days, from the towns which are close to the front line, we in Kiev receive a lot of support to take care, including from the military, because we should understand that in Ukraine there are average, civilians who are mobilized to fight, and their families must be in Kiev or elsewhere. But no, we still have the progress. There was this unexpected and huge success in early September in the freeing one part of the Ukraine. Now, of course, Russia is not caught up in the surprise, but one by one, the villages are taken and liberated. So it's still there, and that's probably the reason why also it looks, as a defeat for the Russian military commander, and therefore there was this kind of inner demand in Russia to have more harsher campaign, which also could be sold to the Russian audience, unfortunately.
Yeah. Nataliya, when you travel around for your reporting, give us a sense of what cities and towns that have been targeted are facing in terms of trying to rebuild their lives.
So I should say that the central Ukraine and the western Ukraine, including the Kyiv, for the last months has enjoyed quite relatively peaceful life. Ukrainians were trying to find their balance between the everyday life, how you economically pursue, how you prepare for the winter, which is harsh in Ukraine. So you need really to limit the resources. We understand that there might be some energy issues. So people are really preparing and trying to understand that it might be a long war. At the same time, I also travel, and within the number of the projects, I also document the alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. I spent a lot of time in newly liberated areas, and we do see that wherever the territories were occupied, we have the cases of the execution, tortures, keeping civilians in the torture chambers. We're speaking about dozens of people, but these dozens of people are in every town we go, in every village there would be somebody. So it's maybe not that horrific as one mass grave, which was publicized, but we really understand the price for the of the occupation. That really makes Ukrainians very defiant that, there is no other way. The alternatives are very bad. Either you are resisting or you're occupied with all the impact on the human life. So still for Ukrainians, the clear goal is to liberate as many territories as possible. And what is also important, yesterday, when there were over 80 rockets sent all over the country, at least half of them were shot down by the Ukrainian air defense. Therefore, for Ukrainians, it's very practical. This calls for air defense, which is quite unique. It's very hard to have a neighbor with, there are different wars in different places, but we're fighting the war against the country, which is, of course, a huge military power with ability to fire rockets, fire missiles from the long distance. So therefore, this air defense is critical, and we understand any shut-down rocket saves lives.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what hearing President Zelenskyy gets a little later. Good to have you on. Thank you so much.
Welcome.